Have you ever wondered how a huge company decides to pull the trigger on a multi-billion-dollar project? Like building a massive new factory or buying another company? Well, it's one of the biggest questions in business, and believe it or not, the answer often boils down to just one single, incredibly powerful number. Okay, let's really think about this. Put yourself in the shoes of a CFO. Your team comes to you with this amazing, game-changing idea, but it's going to cost a ton of money up front. How do you know if it's a smart move? You can't just rely on a gut feeling, right? You need a benchmark, a clear line in the sand that tells you, yes, this will make us money, or nope, this is a bad idea.
And that benchmark has a name. It's called the hurdle rate. The best way to think about it is like a high jump bar for money. If a project can promise a return that's high enough to clear that bar, it gets a green light. But if it can't, it gets rejected. Doesn't matter how cool the project sounds. So the real question is, how do we figure out just how high to set that bar?
So our first mission is to give this hurdle rate its official finance world name. This minimum return a project has to make, that's what we call the cost of capital.
The logic here is actually pretty simple. To pay for any big new project, a company has to get cash from somewhere. And that cash, well, it's not free. The cost of capital is literally the price the company pays to get its hands on those funds. So, to actually create value, any investment has to earn back at least what it costs to finance it. If it doesn't, you're basically just lighting money on fire.
All right, so that brings us to the next obvious question. Where does all this cash actually come from? If we can figure that out, we can start to break this whole thing down.
Generally speaking, a company has about 3 main buckets of money it can dip into. First, you've got debt. That's just borrowing money, usually by selling bonds. Second is preferred stock, which is kind of like a hybrid between a stock and a bond. And third, you have common equity. This is the money that comes from the owners of the company, the shareholders.
Now here's the thing. Each of those sources of cash has a totally different price tag. So our job now is to figure out the costs for each one, piece by piece, before we can get to that big overall number. Let's start with debt. The cost of debt is basically the interest rate the company has to pay to convince investors to lend it money. But debt has this awesome little secret weapon. The interest payments a company makes are tax deductible. What that means is the government essentially gives you a discount for borrowing money. So the real cost of debt is always lower than what it says on the label.
And here's the formula for how that works. It's super simple. You just take the yield on the debt, that's the Y here, and you multiply it by 1 minus the company's tax rate, or T. That gives you the true after-tax cost of debt. That's the number we care about.
Let's look at our example company, Baker Corporation. They can borrow money at a rate of 10.84%. But once we factor in their 35% tax rate, their actual cost drops all the way down to just over 7%. That's a huge discount, and it's all thanks to that tax shield.
Okay, next up is the second source of cash, preferred stock. Now, in one way, this is simpler because it just pays a fixed dividend. But there's a catch. When a company issues new stock, it has to pay fees to investment bankers for helping them sell it. These are called flotation costs, and they eat into the amount of cash the company actually gets to keep. So the formula has to account for that. We take the annual dividend, DP, and we divide it by the stock price after we've subtracted those pesky flotation costs. Because the company is getting less cash in its pocket, the effective cost of that cash goes up. For Baker Corp, it works out to 10 and 94%.
And finally, we get to the cost of common equity. This one is a little more abstract. It's not a direct payment like interest. It's really an opportunity cost. It's the return that the owners, the shareholders, expect to get for putting their money in the company. If they don't think the company can deliver that return, they'll just take their money and invest it somewhere else they can. Simple as that.
So how in the world do you figure out what shareholders are expecting? Well, a common method is something called the dividend valuation model. It basically says the return shareholders demand is made up of 2 things: the dividend they expect to get next year, plus the rate at which they think that dividend is going to grow in the future.
So, for Baker Corporation, when you run the numbers, their cost of equity comes out to be a nice, round 12%. Now, this is a really important point. That 12% is also the cost of using the company's own profits, its retained earnings, to fund a project. Why? Because that money belongs to the shareholders, and if you reinvest it for them, they expect the same return as if they gave you new cash.
Okay, we've done the heavy lifting. We figured out the individual costs for debt, for preferred stock, and for common equity. Now it's time to put all the pieces together and find that one single hurdle rate we've been searching for this whole time.
Now, we can't just take a simple average of the three costs. That wouldn't make sense, because companies don't use each source equally. Baker Corporation, for example, gets 60% of its funding from equity, 30% from debt, and only 10% from preferred stock. So to get the real cost, we have to calculate a weighted average, where each cost is weighted by how big of a slice of the pie it is.
And when you multiply each cost by its weight and then add all of those up, you get the final answer, the weighted average cost of capital. What everyone calls the WACC for Baker Corporation is 10.41%. That is the height of our high jump bar. So there you have it, 10.41%. That's the magic number. That is the hurdle rate. So when that engineering team comes back with their big idea, the decision is actually pretty black and white. If they expect the project to return 11%, great, it's a go. But if it's only expected to return 10%, sorry, it's a no-go. That's just how powerful this number is.
But wait, the story isn't quite over. Because what if a company could actually lower that bar? What if they could play with the numbers and manage their cost of capital by changing how they pay for everything?
Check out this table. It shows exactly that. In Plan A, with just a little bit of debt, the company's cost of capital is 10.9%. Now look at Plan B. By adding more of that cheap, tax-friendly debt, the overall cost drops to 10.3%. Nice, but look what happens in Plan C. If they push their debt all the way to 60%, the cost actually jumps back up to 11.4%. What is going on here?
Well, it all comes down to one word: risk. As a company takes on more and more debt, it starts to look a lot riskier to everybody. Lenders get nervous and start demanding higher interest rates. And shareholders, they get nervous too, and they demand a higher return to compensate them for all that extra risk. Pretty soon, the benefit of that cheap debt gets totally wiped out because all the other costs are going up.
What you get is this classic U-shaped curve. Using a little bit of debt helps lower your costs, but using too much debt makes things worse. The ultimate goal for any CFO is to find that perfect sweet spot right at the bottom of the U. That's the company's optimal capital structure, the perfect mix of debt and equity that gives them the lowest possible hurdle rate.
Which leaves us with a final question to chew on. We've clearly shown that after you account for taxes, debt is almost always the cheapest way to raise money. So why don't companies just fund themselves with, say, 99% debt? The answer is hiding in that U-shaped curve, and it gets to the heart of the fundamental trade-off between risk and return that every single business on the planet has to manage.